हाज़रीन मजलिस अस्सलाम वालेकुम व रहमतुल्लाहि व बरकातुहू।
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
So the topic that we've been discussing this year is called the spiritual path to emotional intelligence. And this is the sixth lecture in the series. And before I begin, I'll just bring everyone up to speed on what we have been discussing. It's obviously a very, very broad topic. And some of the things that we've been discussing are that, when we think about intelligence itself, in the West, we have this concept of IQ, which is mental intelligence. Then we have the concept of emotional intelligence. We have the concept of spiritual intelligence. And in Islam, actually, it is much more holistic. In other words, Islam does not distinguish between the rational mind and feeling with the heart and all of these things. So the term that we came up to describe all of this is that of AQ. It is our Aql quotient, or it is how we use our Aql, because it's a very interesting subject. But in the Quran, Aql, it is not a noun. For example, in the West, when we think about it in English, intelligence is a noun, right? It is something that you have. However, the Quran talks about it very differently. The Quran talks about using the intellect. So the intellect is only useful when it is activated. In other words, and also another point to note is that in Islam, using the intellect or using the Aql is always a positive thing. So you know how in the West we have this concept of you can be an evil genius, for example, right? So you can be very intelligent, but you may be completely off, on the wrong track. In other words, you may be doing harm to society as opposed to good. We all know that, right? Things that people do, they don't lack intelligence. They only lack using the intellect, which means that one of the key things about the intellect is to recognize, because say if you are looking at a painting, right? And if you are truly a good artist, you will recognize another artist's skill in making that painting, right? So similarly, if you are a person of intellect, when you recognize that the highest intellect is that of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So not only is He the highest intellect, but He's actually guided us every step of the way. So the second key point is that intellect is only useful when activated, and the highest intellect is that of God. And when we recognize that, then automatically our actions become one of submission. Does that make sense? So obviously it's a really brief, two-line summary of what we've been talking about. Now, where do emotions fit in? Because the topic is obviously emotional intelligence, right? So what we notice in the Quran is that the Quran and God do not expect us to be only rational human beings. It's very, very interesting how the Quran uses emotion. But to put it very briefly, the seat of understanding in Islam, so when we're talking in the West or when we're talking in English, we have this concept of the battle of the heart and mind. In other words, my mind is telling me something and my heart or my emotions are telling me something else. In the Quran, it is not like that. In fact, Allah uses the heart as the seat of understanding. Very, very important. What does that mean in essence? It means that when we are using our intellect, our emotions and our mind is completely aligned to what we're doing, right? And so also the idea that human beings, the ones who are believers, have an alive heart. In other words, we are expected to feel. It's not that feelings are leading us away. It is we understand and recognize God with our heart. We've all heard the hadith that it is the heart which accepts God and which understands God. We know the Quran, for example, was revealed on the heart of the Prophet, not the mind. So can you see, again, it's much more to that. But in essence, if we understand that in Islam there is no dichotomy, it is not a thing of being the heart against the mind. As human beings, if we're having emotions, it's a very positive thing. Sometimes, what leads us astray is we think, emotions are only meant to be suppressed. And as we'll see today, it's not like that. As long as our emotions are not leading us away from the path of God, they're a very positive thing. And one of the other things to notice is that the reason why the Quran remains relevant today is because it appeals to the hearts and emotions of human beings. If it was only an intellectual book, it would be less relevant. Why? Because it was revealed a long time ago. But the reason, and today inshallah we'll see an example of that, that even today when we read the Quran, if we have an emotional response, that's exactly what God wants from us. So emotions in the Quran serve a very important function. First and foremost, they serve the function of allowing us to really get it in a way that mind will not. Let me explain this through an example. So say if you're told that, for example, let's take smoking. So intellectually you know that smoking is bad for you. Everyone knows that. There is not a single person today who doesn't know that smoking is bad, right? And yet people struggle to give it up. Why? Why do they struggle to give it up when they know that it is bad for them? Intellectually they know, right? But that knowledge has not penetrated into their heart. They don't really believe it with their whole soul. If they did, nobody would smoke. Like you wouldn't take rat poison, for example. Would you ingest rat poison? No, because you believe it in your heart that rat poison is bad for you. Now, a very strange example, but stay with me for a bit. Okay? So when we read the Quran and we see examples of people that when they hear the word of God, they fall down on their faces making sajda. Everyone, even if we don't know the verse, we know of this thing, right? What is that? When Nabi Musa alayhi salam, when he sees the mountain crumble, what does he do? Anyone? What does Nabi Musa alayhi salam do when he sees the mountain crumble? So when he's talking to God and he's asking God to show himself, and when God says, okay, look at the bush, and all of that happens, then what does he do? He faints, right? He swoons. What does that show us? Do you faint when you know something in your head? No. You have this emotional response when you really feel it with your being, when you experience the emotional extent of what is being talked about. Right? So this is the kind of emotions that people who are believers, they feel upon hearing the word of God. Okay? So in other words, the Quran is supposed to move us. That's the purpose. So not only are we supposed to have the correct belief in our mind, but we're supposed to feel it with our hearts. And that's how we truly, we've all heard of the distinction between haqqul yaqeen and ainul yaqeen and ilmul yaqeen, right? When we know something with our mind, it's a very surface level kind of belief. But when we truly have been burnt by fire, for example, we know not to go close to a fire, right? So today, inshallah, we will talk about, just a little of a context. So we've been talking about positive emotions in the Quran. And a couple of sessions ago, we talked about the experience of khashya. And today we'll go back to the ayat that we discussed and talk about another emotion that was discussed, which is a very interesting concept, which is the concept of tawakkul. Right? Now, tawakkul we all know. All of us have heard the word or heard the phrase that have tawakkul on Allah. So how do we understand tawakkul? Why is it important? Why do we actually need to experience this? And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, how do we nurture the tawakkul in our heart? Because again, we've heard it from our heart, from our ears, and we know the concept that you should trust and rely on God. But do we really, do we experience that with our whole being? So inshallah today we'll see what that means. So there's this beautiful verse from Surah Anfal, which is verse 2, where it says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Innamal mu'minuna allazina iza zukirallahu wajilat qulubuhum. Beautiful verse, right? Indeed, only those people are mu'mineen, the ones who when they have the remembrance of Allah, wajilat qulubuhum, their hearts tremble. Now, most of the time when we read this verse, what is it translated as? That they have this fear of God, right? But khashya is actually not exactly a fear, like you fear fire, for example. So, when we talked about khashya, we really explored what khashya actually means is an awe. It is the understanding of awe. When you are, say, in a mountain, right? If you're in the middle of the mountains and you feel so small, and when you experience that glory, that is vastness around you. And the feeling, do you ever get butterflies in your stomach when you do that, right? So those butterflies, or when your hair stands on end, or when you get goosebumps, that is the feeling of khashya. It is a positive experience. You know, when we translate it as fear, it's not something we will run towards. But we talked a lot about how this khashya is a very important. So let's go on with this ayat, and it says, وَإِذَا تُلِيَتْ عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتُهُ. And when their signs are recited to them, so again, don't only think of signs as in the verses of the Quran, but signs in the universe. You know, when you see something which is clearly a sign from God, whether it is a natural sign or something that has worked out in your life without you knowing, زَادَتْهُمْ إِيمَانًا وَعَلَىٰ رَبِّهِمْ يَتَوَكِّلُونَ. So they are the ones who then have tawakkul on Allah. They begin to trust in their Lord. So like I said, you know, we covered the emotion of khashya, but this verse is talking about two different emotions. It's first talking about the khashya, and then it is talking about tawakkul. So let's try and understand what tawakkul actually is. The word tawakkul itself is derived from wakalat, meaning taking for oneself a representative. In other words, having somebody on your side, okay? And it is generally translated to mean having trust in Allah. Now, what do we mean by trust exactly? So what psychologists tell us is that trust is a very different kind of thing, because it is both a rational and an emotional thing. How is it rational? So say, for example, I meet somebody the first time. Would I give them the keys to my car? No. Why? Because I don't know them, they haven't proved themselves, right? So it would be silly to trust somebody who you don't know anything about. So at that point, it's a rational thing. It's in your mind. You are trying to figure out if this person is reliable or not, okay? However, once they have passed the test, and we'll talk about, you know, what things is the human mind looking for when we're looking for trust. When they cross all of these things, then we get the feeling of trust. In the words that we tend to relax around them, we feel comfortable, we have a feeling of confidence in our hearts. Does that make sense? So can you see how, so again, it's completely in line with what we're talking, because what we're talking, that there's no difference in intellecting, and the word is intellecting with the heart actually. So intellecting and having emotions. So when you begin to trust somebody, it goes through a series of phases. Now, what are some of the things that we look for when we are looking to trust? First of all, we know that we need to have an understanding that that person has no hidden agenda. In other words, they know what they want, you know, they're clear about communicating, they're transparent, in other words, right? If you met somebody and right off the bat, you found out, you know what, that they only met you because you could get in touch, you could help them get in touch with somebody else, for example, it would lessen your trust, right? Second thing is that you need to know that they actually care, that they have compassion for you, that they will have your back if something goes wrong. Thirdly, you need to know that they have a good character. In other words, they're trustworthy. When they speak, they tell the truth. You also need to know, so say if a person met all of these things, right? But they just didn't have too much of ability. They did not have competence. So let's take the example of a dentist, right? You met a dentist who was an amazing human being, you know, so they were really kind, they were compassionate, they really wanted to help you, but they had failed dental school. Would you trust them with your teeth? No. So in other words, in order to trust somebody, they need to have competence as well. They need to have a connection with you. In other words, even if they were very compassionate too, you need to know that your dentist is not just really caring about everyone, but he cares about you as his patient, right? Then they need to do something for you. They need to make a contribution to the betterment of your life. They actually need to add value to your life. And the last thing is that they need to be consistent. So, you know, if you had a dentist, you know, one day, like he was really good, and the next day when you went to him, he pulled out the wrong tooth, that would be a big breach of trust, right? So In other words, they need to meet all of these criteria. Now, obviously, all of this is usually subconscious. It's not that, when we meet somebody, we actually go through every level. But the idea is that these are the things that the human mind is subconsciously scanning for to recognize whether or not to trust somebody. Okay? So now, when we look at people's resumes for these virtues, is there anyone who meets all of them consistently all the time? Is there? I mean, you can come pretty close. Like if you really trust somebody and your relationship is really good, it is built over time, right? But when you look at God's resume, right, and I am actually saying that quite intentionally, God's resume, and what is God's resume? It's Ayatul Kursi. If you look at Ayatul Kursi, it is literally read it as God's resume. That's exactly what it is. He's telling you how he meets every single one of these criteria. So if you're looking for a protector, if you're looking for somebody to rely on, you are not going to do better because he has the competence, right? He's all qadir, he has the knowledge, he has a connection with you. Up to now, he has sustained you to bring you to where you are. And everything in our lives has worked out perfectly to get us to this stage. Would you agree? So another thing about trust is that it is a two-way relationship. So a person could meet all of these criteria, right? So if I meet somebody and they meet every single one of these criteria, I still need to take a little bit of a leap of faith. I still need to make the decision to trust them and let go of, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is because in today's day and age, what is the number one feeling that all of us feel most of the time? Any idea? Anxiety, wouldn't you say? Anxiety is the number one emotion that runs our life today. As a parent, I would suggest, and please look at it for yourself, the vast majority of things we do as parents are based on fear. Right? Fear of what's going to happen if we don't do this. And that is all anxiety, right? Trust is actually the opposite of that. When you trust somebody, and another example which makes a lot of sense is, say when you are going on an airplane. And obviously, say if you had a choice between Air Canada and Sunwing or Frontier Airways or whatever that is, right? Which doesn't have a very good safety record. Which one would you choose? Air Canada if you possibly can, right? If you can afford it, if it's not wildly expensive, you would choose the more reliable airline. So now you boarded the flight and you are clear where you're going. So say you're going to Ottawa, and as far as you know, the pilot also knows that you're going to Ottawa, right? Now the plane takes off, but you don't know what the flight plan of the pilot is. Do you know what the flight plan is? Do you know how he's going to fly? Say if he gets turbulence on the way, or if something goes wrong, or if there's air traffic or whatever, he is not going to share every single item of the journey with you. Why? Why won't he do that? Well, you might get anxious, or you don't know enough. Like you don't know why he's making the decisions he's making, right? But at the end of it, or she, you know that basically if he knows where you're going, he's going to do his best to get you there safely, right? And for the vast majority of time, they actually do, okay? So now, again, look at it in terms of our life, right? So we all know that our direction is God. We're all clear on that. We are all going there, whether or not we like to, whether or not we are willing, right? And, there is a flight plan, except that we don't know about it. We don't know the flight plan. But how do we relate to it? We actually are so anxious that we want to control every single bit of it. With the slightest hint of turbulence, we get derailed. We get so bent out of shape that, oh my God, now what's happening? My life is not working out. Right? But if we had trust in the pilot, then would we be behaving like this, right? And this is a really good things to ask yourself, because how do you know, like, all of these concepts, and that's what, I really try to do for myself, is that all these concepts are in our heads. They sometimes don't reach our hearts, and they sometimes don't reach our lives in action. And unless and until that doesn't happen, the Quran will not do its job of guiding us. It will not, we keep reading this thing, Allah bi zikrillahi tatma'innul qulub, right? Every single one, a 4-year-old can recite this ayah. With the remembrance of God, are our hearts set to peace. Yes, peace. That's all. It's the opposite of anxiety, right? So to me, and this is not a judgment, it is an evaluation of ourselves, right? So if I am feeling anxiety, despite the fact that I'm praying every day, despite the fact that I'm doing zikr, despite the fact that I'm doing tasbih, does it not tell me that there is some misconnection? Right? It tells me that, although all of this information is in my head, somehow it has not penetrated beyond that, okay? So, let's talk a little bit about what ahadith tell us. So, again, another beautiful verse of the Quran. And these verses of the Quran that we're reciting today, they're actually like positive affirmations. So we know about affirmations, right? Affirmations are things that you tell yourself, that you remind yourself to actually train your brain, to train your heart, to be less anxious and to get on with your life, right? That's what affirmations are. So these verses of the Quran are actually affirmations. And if we use them as such, like if we remind ourselves of these affirmations, then it is actually going to work. So, for example, when Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam, he was asked about the verse, this is from Surah Talaq, فَمَنْ يَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ إِنَّ اللَّهَ بَالِغُ أَمْرِهِ قَدْ جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدْرًا. Again, many of us recite this verse every single day, and lots of benefits reciting it, right? So he was asked, what does this mean? And he said that there are various degrees of tawakkul in Allah. Of them, one is that you should put your trust in God in all your affairs, being well pleased with whatever God does to you, knowing for certain that He does not cease in His goodness and grace towards you, and that the command therein rests with Him. So put your trust in God, leaving that to Him and relying upon Him in regard to that and everything other than that. In other words, again, if we had internalized this verse, then it would mean that our heart would be free from anxiety. That we would not, if something went wrong, we wouldn't keep second guessing, what lies in future for us. Okay. So what are the benefits? What happens when we have this feeling of certainty or trust or reliance? First of all, we are much more capable. We have a lot more energy, because as we've all experienced, anxiety is one of the most draining emotions that we can feel. True? So if I'm continuously anxious, first of all, my body is working 100 times more than it needs to, right? Again, we did a bit of this, and by the way, all the previous lectures are online, so if you wanted to catch up, you can. We talked a little bit about our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. We didn't do it in those terms, but in essence, in the old days, the idea was that you were pretty calm, and then when a tiger was attacking you, you were on high alert. You either ran away or you fought the tiger back, and then you went back to a state of calm. The problem with the way we live our lives today, and most of it is self-created, right, is that we are continuously on high alert. We are acting as if there are tigers attacking us everywhere, even when they're not. And if you think I'm completely off the wall, just notice how you drive. And again, this is because I'm a very, not a very calm driver, let's put it this way, unless I really make an intention and I work on myself, right? So, just notice how anxious you are. Just notice how you woke up this morning, when the alarm went off, what your body went through. Then your kids came in, you were rushing, you were, continuously trying to beat the clock. You had to be in 2 different places at the same time. Then you were upset at somebody, and they were upset at somebody, and on and on and on that day went. Does it ring a bell with anyone? right? Sometimes our days are like that, right? And the idea is that when we are in this state of anxiety, our body does not have time to recuperate, our immune system is being suppressed. There are actually many physiological, physical, emotional, mental costs to living like this. And so again, if we have all of this anxiety and stress in us, it means that we are not in a state of calm, and we're really not in a state of tawakkul at that point. So on the opposite, when we do have a state of tawakkul, when we are relying on Allah, then we have much more energy, because we're not, our body is not working so hard, first of all. Secondly, we are much less lonely, because as you know, when we're going through a hard time and when we're feeling stressed, how many of us feel that there is no one there for us? We feel no one understands. And again, when we, form this relationship with Allah, we know that we have, and there's many, many du'as and, ahadiths that tell us that we feel His friendship and companionship in our lives on an ongoing basis. Again, this is a feeling, if you have that, because feelings run the show. We can talk to the mind as much as we want, but until our feelings don't fall into place, we are not going to be able to change our lives, right? We are much more authentic. So when we trust somebody, say with your spouse or with a good friend, you're not wearing the same mask that you are in society. You don't have to blow dry your hair, although you should at home. But anyway, we let ourselves, we are easy, we are comfortable, right? So also trusting gives us a much more positive outlook on the world. Because if you're continuously anxious by definition means we're on high alert, we're vigilant. Again, we explained the whole brain science behind it. And it's really good to understand the brain, because if you understand what's going on, you can actually work to counteract it. But if we're feeling continuously overwhelmed and our emotions are taking us, wherever they want to, then it's harder. Tawakkul and a sense of trust also gives us resilience. Resilience means we are able to bounce back when something bad happens. So, guaranteed, while we have life, there are going to be hurdles. Right? There is none of us who can say that I have had a life free of challenges. Okay? And the idea is that when we trust, remember again, when we're trusting in that pilot, that he knows where he's going, then even if he has to take a diversion, we don't get that anxious. We know, okay, worst comes to worst, I'll be 2 hours late for my meeting or whatever, but inshallah, I will get there safely. So again, when you trust the one who's running the show, then you can relax. We also have emotional freedom. This is what we've been talking about. So the opposite again of tawakkul is to be in a state of anxious and anxiety all the time. And what Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says, verily independence and honor are in a state of travel. And when they come to a place of tawakkul, they take up residence there. It is so beautiful. So in other words, that when you're experiencing this connection, then, independence, this freedom. So again, think of independence not as a, because very often, when we're talking about independence from people, we are mistaking it for emotional distance. It's not the same thing. Because what Islam tells us that we have to be connected to human beings. It's a very challenging thing. It's very challenging to be connected, to be compassionate, but not to be emotionally dependent on other people. Extremely challenging. Why? Because say if we really are in love with our spouse, okay? Everything they do will have an emotional impact on us. True? So what we are being asked to do is to have that love, but not be bent out of shape. Not easy, right? It's not easy. However, it is possible, because again, when we keep bringing our attention to who is running the show, and the fact that I have been guaranteed that I will be tested, every single one of us is being tested in a different way. And when I remind myself of these things, and I remind myself of the pilot who knows where I am going and who has the flight plan, but who may not have shared it with me, then I can be much more relaxed, right? Again, there's another hadith which says, what is tawakkul? It is recognition of the fact that the creation of Allah can neither cause you harm nor yield benefit, neither it can grant or withhold a bounty, and one must severe expectations from the creation of Allah. When a person becomes such, he shall never work for anyone other than Allah, and shall never hope and expect from anyone other than Allah, and this is the reality of tawakkul. Now again, what I would suggest is when we read verses like this, right? If we expect it to mean that we actually will have no feelings, that we will have never feelings of expectation, that is a very unrealistic standard, because we are human beings and the human heart has been created to feel. So what does it mean that you will not have expectations from people? Because very often, people say, oh, I don't expect anything from anyone. Do we ever hear that? Do we believe them? No, why? Because when people deceive you, or when people fall short of what you expect, your heart will hurt. That is normal and it is human. The problem is not, in fact, again, if you are hurting, if somebody has upset you, we need to congratulate ourselves, because that means that our heart is still alive. If it wasn't alive, lack of emotion, again, in the Quran is not looked upon very well, right? And in psychology, a lack of emotion is a very serious mental and emotional disorder. What it means is that you will not take actions in response to those emotions. And we will look at an example, right, from the Quran. So, and lastly, the two more verses or hadiths from the Quran. Another thing is that in Surah Nahl we are told, truly he has no authority over those who believe and trust in their Lord. In other words, shaitan cannot misguide you. If you have tawakkul in Allah, if you have faith that the pilot is taking you where you need to go, if, say, another person who's a pilot from another airline comes and tells you, what, this guy doesn't know what he's doing and he should have taken this road and he should have taken this road, are you going to believe him? No, because you say that guy is from Sunwing, okay? I hope I don't get into trouble by taking names, but anyway. And, this guy is Air Canada, he's, been flying for 25 years, has a perfect safety record, whatever, right? You're not going to let that person deceive you. Similarly, when we have that faith in God, shaitan cannot, even though he may do waswasa or whatever, he cannot waylay us, because we're clear that the pilot knows where he's going, right? And lastly, hadith tells us, there's a hadith from Imam Ali alayhi salam, that tawakkul on God is a source of relief from every evil and protection from every enemy. Again, because it does not waylay us. Okay, now enough. Let's look at some examples from the Quran. And this example that I've chosen is the story of and Musa, which is related in Surah Qasas. And the reason why this is such a beautiful story, all mothers, we really should learn and read and reflect on this story. So obviously there's a lot to cover, and so what I'm going to do is I'll just read the translation of some of the verses and then we will reflect on that. So we all know the story, right? That when Nabi Musa alayhi salam was born, the Pharaoh was killing the boys, right? And so how to protect him. And so the verse starts, this is verse 7 onwards from Surah Qasas, where it says, we revealed to the mother of Musa, nurse him, but if you fear for him, then cast him into the river. Very, very interesting. So if you're anxious about him, then literally put him in the river. Now, generally when we're anxious about something, what do? We hold on tight. Do we let it go? So this is such good teaching for parents, right? Such good teaching. So cast him into the river and fear not nor grieve. Surely we shall bring him back to you and make him one of the messengers. Then, the story goes that the wife of Pharaoh picks him up and convinces him to bring him up in the palace. So again, what was the only place that he could be safe? Was the house, was the palace of the Pharaoh himself. And so, again, the idea, the story, we could do a whole series of majalis just on the story, right? But the idea is that literally Allah provided his safety from the least possible place that you could, so he was literally in the lion's den, pretty much. Then, again, so, the story is very long, but I want to, focus on one verse, which is verse 10, where it says, وَأَصْبَحَ فُؤَادُ أُمِّ مُوسَى فَارِغًا. The heart of Musa was desolate. It was empty of everything except fear for the safety of the child. So did she, although Allah is telling her, do not fear and do not grieve, is she fearing? Of course she's fearing, because she is a mother. But she does not let her fear stop her from doing the right thing. This is the key thing that we need to remember from the story. That she is very, very anxious, obviously. However, she still obeys the teaching of God, which says, don't hold him tight. Literally, go and put him in a river. Okay? Then, of course, when she does this, and again, Allah says, it was at the tip of her tongue. Because again, a mother's heart, we all know what that's like, right? Please save my baby. But Allah says that He Himself strengthened her heart so that she wouldn't do that. So because of her trust and reliance in Allah, again, what did her trust look like? It did not look like that, she was just hunky-dory and she said, sure, I'll go and put my baby in the river. She was very anxious, but she still did it. And because of that, Allah says, we have not strengthened her heart, and that she might be one of the believers. Now, another very important thing. In verse 13, Allah says, thus he returned him to his mother. So we know how he came back to his mother, right? Because he wouldn't nurse from anyone else. And then his sister went and, just recommended, oh, by the way, I know somebody who might be able to help. And so he was returned to the mother. However, look at verse 13. Thus we returned him to his mother so that she might be comforted and not grieve. Allah changes history so that a mother's heart might be comforted. This is the power of tawakkul. That's what the verse says. Yes, obviously history had to be made, but the verse clearly says that we returned him to his mother that she might be comforted and not grieve, and that she might know that God's promise is true. But she had to take the first step. She had to take that leap of faith and say, yes, although my heart is firagan, although it is desolate, I will still put him in. So one last example. This is also about Nabi Musa alayhi salam. Now he is grown up, right? And as we know, Nabi Musa had many, many, many challenges in his life. And one of the challenges is related in Surah Shura, which is chapter 26, and this is from verse 60 onwards, right? And it says, so when the two hosts saw each other, the companions of Musa cried out. So in other words, now they're literally at the Red Sea. This is where they are. So just to paint you a picture of what's happening, who's behind them? The Pharaoh and all his armies, right? All his might is behind them, and ahead of them is the Red Sea. So what do they do now? So can you imagine the sense of panic? It is literally, between, we've all heard the phrase between a rock and a hard place. This is between Pharaoh and the Red Sea, literally, okay? So of course what happens is that people who are with Nabi Musa alayhi salam, they panic and they say, Inna la mudrikun. Indeed, to put it in very plain English, we are dead meat. Like we're done for. There is nothing that will save us now. And look how Nabi Musa replies. He says, Qala kalla. Never. No. Don't worry about it. Inna maya rabbi la sahyadin. Indeed, my Lord is with me and He will guide me. Can you imagine the level of confidence and faith that Musa alayhi salam had at that point, right? And then after that, after he says this, after he says, no, my Lord is with me and indeed He will guide me, that's when he gets the wahi that, put your staff, and that's how the Red Sea is parted. So again, an example of when you have complete, and this is, if you look at it from a, very normal perspective, he did not, we won't go into the whole idea about ilm and nabuwat and all of that, but in essence, when you are faced between two very strong opposing forces and you don't know where you are going and you don't know from where you are going to get help, if you can have faith at that point, right? And faith at that point means what? It means you still do the right thing and you trust in Allah. Two very important things, because none of this, right, means that tawakkul is not sitting and waiting that, Allah will guide me. No, He said, I'm here and He will show me the next step. And when He shows you the next step, then what do you need to do? You need to act, right? You need to take action. So let's, end with a little bit about how we actually practically, how do we, put this into effect. So what we've been doing is at the end of every lecture, we are literally talking about a little practice. Practice means that something you do on a regular basis to get more intelligent emotionally. And the idea is, again, with tawakkul, how is it related to emotional intelligence is this, that intelligence means that you feel the emotion, but you still do the right thing. You do not wait, like many of us. Let's take an example, right? So say if I want to apply for a job, or if I want to learn a language, right? If I keep telling myself that I will do it when when I'm feeling confident, I will make that next step when I'm feeling confident, right? We need to understand that the key understanding of emotional intelligence is that when we take the right action, very often, that's when the emotion comes. If we wait for the emotion, let's talk about driving. How many of us, when we first passed the test, we were so confident that we just went on the highway and we were fine? Anyone? Most of us were a little bit nervous when we got our license, right? So if we sat at home and we told ourselves, what, I will go on the highway, and there are people like that, right? They say, when I'm feeling confident, I will go on the highway. And it's many, many years and they're still not going on the highway because the feeling hasn't come. Those of us who feel a little bit of anxious and say, remind ourselves that I did pass my test and I do have the skills and I have a reliable car, and we go on the highway, 1 month, 2 months, we get the confidence, right? So the idea is that we cannot wait for our emotions only to guide us. We need to take the correct actions and then the emotions follow. So how do we develop tawakkul? You cannot trust someone you do not know. That's dumb. That's not intelligent, right? So how can we trust God if we don't know Him? Same thing, right? And I keep going back to the same thing. We cannot really trust or have any relationship with Allah until we don't get to know His words. Because this is His love letter to us. This is how He introduces Himself. This is how He has explained all of life to us. And if we don't use the manual, we're not going to know Him. It's as simple as that, right? Secondly, obviously, we need to do our homework. So, for example, when Nabi Musa alayhi salam was at the Red Sea, I'm sure he didn't just show up. He probably had a strategy, he had prepared, he had people with him. And again, so we need to remind ourselves what is in my control and what is not in my control. When we're sitting, so I like to think of it as my job and God's job. What's my job and what's God's job? So let's take an example of a watch. If my watch is not working, I need to get it fixed. So if I go to the watch fixer, watchmaker, what do they call it? So, sorry?
Repair shop.
Repair shop, thank you. So if I go to the repair shop and I show the person my watch and I say, this needs to be fixed. And they might say, okay, give me the watch. I say, no, I don't like to part with this watch, just fix it. Right? The idea is that I do need to let go at some point. If my watch is going to be fixed, I need to take it out and give it to a person who is trustworthy, right? And so God's job also means that, so what do? We always worry about the outcome. If I do this, what will happen? If I put my child into this school, what will be the outcome? If I put my child into this, and what is Allah asking us, how do we develop tawakkul, is to take the first step. You cannot expect to know the outcome. I was thinking what would be a good example. Does anyone here bake meringues? Okay. So right, that when you bake a meringue as opposed to anything else, you can do everything right and the meringue will still fall flat. Why is that? Any idea? Humidity, right? Something that you cannot control. So, what is your job? Your job is to get the ingredients, to beat it properly, to probably pick a good day, not something very humid, right? But it's God's job to control the weather. It's not your job. But if we only focus on the weather, we are worrying about God's job. So many things. Every time we are worrying about the outcome of anything, we need to remind ourselves we are in God's territory. Not my problem, right? And again, the idea of practice letting go. These are all practices. They're not something that happens. So literally, whenever I feel the sense of control and anxiety, I remind myself that let go of the watch. If you want the watch fixed, you need to take it out. Okay. And let's end with another hadith from the Prophet ﷺ. He says, whoever wishes to be the most powerful person amongst people must trust God. In other words, again, when we are aligned to people and when we let people determine what we're going to do, then they literally have the remote control of our lives in their hands. But if we are very clear that we are only here to please God, it does not mean people won't get pleased. But when our image and our focus is on pleasing God, then all our other relationships tend to work out.